Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So, today is Saturday, correct? So, the policy will be Saturday class will be longer than other days because tomorrow is Sunday. Probably Friday and Saturday classes will be longer, okay? So, if you don't want to attend a longer class, you can not come for Salah. The other option would be to leave, okay? So,
I think it's every day is okay between Isha and Maghrib. We don't.
Exactly, you go home, you spend half hour,
Yeah.
and there's not much time to do much thing, and then you come back for Isha. But inshallah, it will not take till Isha. Don't scare the people, please. Okay. I'm sorry that we're taking so long to talk about this subject, but I think I learned a lot, and I think we both learned a lot about the subject of the so-called slavery in Islam by studying these things, because there are many ahadith that will come or that you will hear sometimes. If you don't know the context, then you'll be confused. How did this happen? Okay, so you have to know the whole context and the whole history behind this and all the legislations and the rules pertaining to this matter and so on. Okay, and then it is very unfair that people always like to criticize Islam, that there are rules pertaining to captives and slaves. But this is very unfair because, as we said, Islam did not invent this matter. This matter was already established from the beginning of humanity, and Islam came, and this was the status quo. This was basically entrenched in human civilization, in all civilization and all religions. And since it is a problem, it is a problem. We as Muslims admit it is a problem. It is not fair for somebody to be under control of another human being. And this is what Umar ibn Khattab said, مَتَ اسْتَعْبَدْتُمُ النَّاسِ وَقَدْ وَلَدَتْهُمْ أُمَّهَاتُهُمْ أَحْرَارًا. He one time basically scolded one of his generals because the son of that general was unfair to one of the Egyptian the Coptic Christians. So he brought him all over from Egypt to Medina and reprimanded him, and he said to him, who gave you the permission to make people slaves when their mothers bore them or give them birth as free men? Okay, and also Rabi' ibn Amir, he was one of the commanders of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he went to the Persian king Rustum, and Rustum said, okay, I want to talk to you people. So he went in, and Rustum basically asked him, what brought you out of Arabia? And basically he gave him 3 sentences that summarize the mission of Islam. He says, إن الله ابتعثنا لنخرج العباد من عبادة العباد إلى عبادة رب العباد. He says, Allah has brought us out, or has sent us to liberate people from being slaves to other people to being slave only to the one Lord. ومن ضيق الدنيا إلى ساعة الآخرة أو ساعة الدنيا والآخرة. And from the constriction of this dunya, or the narrowness of this dunya, to the ila sa'a, vastness, bravo, to the vastness of the akhirah. ومن جور الأديان إلى عدل الإسلام. And from the injustice of other systems and other religions to the fairness and justice of Islam. Okay, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, basically according to the narration in Bukhari, he did not die until he has freed every captive that fell into his hand, personally, into his property or his possession throughout his life. He did not die until he has freed everyone. Not only that, Prophet ﷺ has freed even those people who were slaves before he became a prophet. زيد بن مش بن ثابت زيد بن حارثة. نعم, Zayd ibn Haritha, who became a slave in the pre-Islamic era, before Prophet Muhammad became a prophet. And Khadija acquired him as a slave boy. And when he married Khadija, she basically had him under Prophet Muhammad as a slave boy. He freed him even before he became a prophet. Not only did he free him, what did he do? He adopted him. He made him his son. And he used to be called Zayd ibn Muhammad, the son of Muhammad. Correct? And not only that, he made him a general on the armies. And he made his son Usama ibn Zayd also a general. And the Arabs, of course, at the time, because slavery was there, and the people of Quraysh especially felt, how can he be a leader of the army while we are in the army? Okay, and he was originally a slave, and his son, the son of a freed slave as well. Now, Prophet ﷺ criticized them and reprimanded them for that. He says he is worthy of leadership, and so is his son. Okay, so that's before, and that is, and during his lifetime, every person who fell into his own captivity, he let go. And this is in Bukhari, that he did not leave behind him anybody who is still under his captivity or being a slave. Okay. And we talked about yesterday, me and Samir, about Maria al-Qibtiyya, the slave girl who was, basically she was a slave in Egypt, Christian Egypt, Coptic king, al-Muqawqis. He sent her along with his sister Sirin, and also a couple of other slave boys. He sent them to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, basically, this is my conviction, that he actually married her, because she had all the privileges of all his other wives. How is that? She had her own residence. Not only that, she had a servant serving her, and that is all documented. So how can she be a slave girl if she had even a servant serving her? And when the niqab was made obligatory on the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, she wore the niqab as well. Okay, so that's a marker that she's one of his wives. He had a son from her, Ibrahim, and we know the story when he died. Okay, she after his death, ﷺ, the Khulafa al-Rashidin continued to support her financially. And when she died, Umar al-Khattab himself gathered the people for her janazah. She was treated, and not only that, all his wives were very jealous of her because she was one of the most beautiful out of all his wives. Aisha said that clearly. She says, I did not have more jealousy than from any of his wives, more than I had from Maria. And I want to mention here something, because I always hear to these people who listen to these people who are attacking Islam and giving a bad image about Islam, and they're not Muslims. Like there's a guy by name of David Wood, very famous on the internet. He has like 1 million subscribers to his channel. You have this guy by name of Bill Warner. He has also many, and all of them attack. This guy I talked to you about before, his name is Ismail. He has a channel by name of Do Not Convert to Islam. Anyhow, those people, they bring the story of Maria al-Qibtiyya. And that is why I said to you this subject is important, because the ahadith will come and incidents will come where you cannot, the people will start attacking Islam based on this. They say that Prophet ﷺ had a sexual relationship with Maria al-Qibtiyya in the house of Hafsa. And you know the verses in Surah Al-Tahrim, Ya ayyuha nabi, lima tuharrimu ma ahallallahu lak tabtaghi mardata azwajik. This incident happened, it's authentic, in Sunan Nisa, it's an authentic story. Before we go into this incident, number one, this incident tells us what? Tells us that everything about the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was narrated to us. Even things that people may think we might be ashamed of, we're not ashamed of. Okay, because he was the role model in all his situations and circumstances, in the house or outside the house, as a leader or as a human being, and so on and so on. Okay, so the fact that those narrations are, we should be proud that we have detailed narrations about everything that we need in our life, or everything that pertained to the life of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his teachings. So yes, it said that Prophet ﷺ دخل بها. He consummated the marriage. That is before maybe she had her private house, and yes, because later on he made her private place. He consummated the marriage in the house of Hafsa. Now, this guy, his name is Ismail, of course, he says he left Islam, he was a Muslim and he left Islam. I talked to you about him before. But anyhow, he says, Hafsa, of course, she got jealous and she got upset. She says, in my house and on my bed, this is what she said. She was, at the time, Hafsa was at her family's house. Hafsa bint Umar al-Khattab, she is the daughter of Umar al-Khattab. Okay? Now, as if we are ashamed of this. We are not ashamed of this. He says, why didn't the Prophet, he says, why did Muhammad? He doesn't say Prophet. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, why did Muhammad wait, if he could not wait to have a sexual relationship with a woman, why didn't he wait for his wife to come back? And since he has other wives, why doesn't he go to another wife? He's free to do whatever he wills. This is his wife. Does anybody ask him, why do you have sex with your own wife? Nobody can ask a question like this. the difference between him, this nakira, what do you call nakira in English?
Reject.
Huh? Yes, somebody who's not known and who doesn't really have any significance, really, this guy. That's why people do not narrate his private life or whatever pertains to his life, because it doesn't make any, has no value to us. He's not a role model, but Prophet Muhammad is a role model, and his wife's narrated everything that happened. So yes, she got upset and she got jealous. In my house, on my bed. Okay, first of all, the houses are his houses, okay? All the houses are his houses. And those are his wives. Did he commit something that is forbidden in Islam? No, it's not forbidden. Okay? His wife, and he had a sexual relationship with her. And then he says, oh, he's sexual promiscuous. Now, to have sex drive, is it a good thing or a bad thing for a man? What, are we ashamed? That's subhanallah. And if you don't have the sex drive, that's your problem. But seriously, Prophet ﷺ had a strong sex drive. And he considered this as something awful about him. But actually, this is manhood, this is masculinity.
It is human nature.
Not only human nature, but Prophet ﷺ, وَكُنَّا نَتَحَدَّثْ أَنَّهُ أُعْطِيَ قُوَّةَ عَشْرَةِ رِجَالٍ. The Sahaba themselves said, we used to talk about amongst ourselves that he had the power or the energy of 10 men. He used to, ﷺ, some nights he used to go at all his houses. Like if he had 10 wives, he would have sexual relationships. Look at the barakah, the blessing in the time. And sometimes the one of us can't even have a sexual relationship with his own wife one time. So seriously, if you're tired or something like this is reality, correct? But this is a miracle actually, that he can do, that he can go and satisfy all his wives. He considered this something awful and really bad about the Prophet ﷺ. He didn't do anything wrong. And this is why when Hafsa basically said to him, and she was angry, and he used to really absorb their anger, and that's something good as well about him, that he used to be able to deal with these tantrums from his wives. On my bed, on laylati wa ala firashi wa yawmi, it says on my night and so on. He said to her, okay, it's not going to happen again, I promise you. And then he even gave her a promise that he would never have any kind of relationship with Maria again. He said to her, but don't tell Aisha, please. He didn't want to make the problem even bigger. And she went, and what did she do? She went and told Aisha. So they both basically ganged up on him. And this is one of the explanations of those verses. Ya ayyuhan nabi lima, and then he promised both of them, okay, I will not have any more relationship with her, just to please them. Because at the time you don't know what to do in such a situation, okay? They're both against you and stuff like this, so he promised them. Allah basically reprimanded the Prophet ﷺ in the verses. لِمَا تُحَرِّمُ, why do you make unlawful to yourself what Allah has made lawful to you? تَبْتَغِي مَرْضَاتَ أَزْوَاجِكَ, just to please your wives, and so on. Allah then reprimanded them, if you give him a hard time anymore, عَسَى رَبُّهُ إِن طَلَّقَكُنَّ أَن يُبْدِلْهُ أَزْوَاجٍ, Allah may make him divorce you, okay, and give him better wives than you, and so on. This is actually one of those explanations. There's another explanation for this verse, but this doesn't matter. This incident did occur. So we are actually very proud of this incident. We have nothing to hide, okay? And it shows that this religion is so comprehensive and so complete in its narrations that everything that happened is narrated to us, okay? And I wanted just to quote to you because, as I mentioned in the introduction, it is very unfair always to talk about Islam and slavery, Islam and slavery. This is a matter of the past. It wasn't an invention of Islam. Islam is the only system, as I mentioned repeatedly in those classes, that abolished slavery and worked on abolishing slavery when nobody could comprehend this. I tell you, there's two incidents. And again, another answer to those people who say, why didn't Islam abolish it at once, right away, and prohibit it at once? Just like Abraham Lincoln did in the US, okay? You asked this question, and many people ask this question. It's a fair question. We say that, multiple answers. Number one, Islam did effectively abolish slavery by cutting off all the avenues leading to slavery and opening up many avenues leading to freeing slaves, okay? This is just like if you have a sink and the tap was pouring into that sink, filling it, and you were not draining. But then now you've basically closed off this tap or almost closed it, okay? And you open up the drain at full. What will happen? It will abolish it. And that is why, look at the verses that talk about slavery. You will always see, because those Allah commanded us in many kind of violations of the Islamic law, that to expiate and go for atonement, what do? We free, emancipate a slave, free a slave, correct? In all these verses you'll see فَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ فَكَذَا فَصِيَامُ ثَلَاثَةِ أَيَّامٍ فَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ فَصِيَامُ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ. Repeatedly Allah will say, and when you don't find, then you do this and this. What does this indicate to you?
That is more important.
No, it indicates that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by His wise laws knew that these laws would lead to total abolishment of slavery that at one point you will not find. He says, if you want to expiate and atone for this sin, you free a slave. But if you can't find, you do such and such. It was unimaginable at the time that you can't find a slave because slavery was rampant, okay? So the fact that Islam put a system to abolish slavery by cutting off all avenues leading to slavery and opening up the avenues leading to freeing slaves, Allah knew that this would be very effective in freeing slaves and abolishing slavery. Okay, that's why repeatedly Allah would say, فَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ, then he should do something else like such as fasting and so on. Okay? Number 2, Prophet ﷺ in multiple incidents in battles, people would come to him, people who fell captives would come to him and say, okay, please let us go. And especially in the Battle of Hawazin, and this was a big one, and many people fell captives. They came to him and said to him, let us go. He says to me, anybody who fell as a share, one of my shares as a captive, or the share of Abdul Muttalib, all my extended family, Abdul Muttalib, he says they are free. So he gave this order to free everybody under his control or the control of his extended family, Abdul Muttalib. That could be hundreds, okay? And then he told the other Sahaba, his army, to do the same. So everybody followed his advice, except a few. Those few basically almost led the rebellion. They were leaders of 3 tribes, okay? Al-Aqra ibn Habis and some other people. To the extent that Prophet ﷺ, as he wanted to leave the masjid, they basically kept on cornering him to the extent that he was cornered at one of those trees that has thorns, and his cloak got caught on one of those thorns because they continued to argue with him. So his policy was to always try to free. And as I mentioned to you, during his lifetime he freed 63 slaves of his own. Aisha freed 67, Abdullah ibn Umar 1,000, Abu Hamad ibn Auf 30,000. If you count all the slaves freed by the Sahaba, there will be tens of thousands of people freed by them. Now, did people who come in the following generations commit a lot of abuses? Yes. And we have to admit this, and we have to basically criticize this and say what is fair. Okay? Muslims throughout the history, the rich or the emperors and so on, abused this. Yes, they abused it. But what we don't care about their actions because they are not role models and they are not authoritative for us. What is authoritative is what is in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and how the Sahaba also, his companions. This is where we get our teachings from. Okay, Abraham Lincoln, yes, he did this, but what happened when you try to abolish something that is so entrenched and has so many economic and political and social ramifications, it would lead to a big problem. And this is what happened: a civil war that led to the death of 600,000 and the disablement of 600,000 people. Not only that, he himself was killed eventually, Abraham Lincoln. And the effects of slavery persisted after him for 150 years. Up until the 1960s, the black people were still treated very unfairly in the United States. They could not sit on the seats. They couldn't even enter restaurants, schools. Not only that, up until the 1940s, they had zoos. A zoo where they put people of color in. They called them ethnological expositions. Very fancy name. Ethnological expositions. They had zoos, and there are pictures. You go on Wikipedia and put ethnological expositions, and you will see that in the Americas and in Europe, they used to get people of other skin color and other looks, whether Asian or African, and sometimes put them in the same cage with an ape. And I saw pictures of some of those black girls holding apes as if they want to show that the similarity, or show that the Darwin's theory that we could be related to this. You understand what I'm trying to say? This is a humiliation, and all the abuses of the slave trade. this never happened in Islam. Even those abuses that happened by Muslim rich people or merchants or emperors throughout never mounted to 1/1,000,000th of what happened to the slaves taken from Africa and other nations to the Americans. It was totally basically inhumane, and I talked about the millions who have died, the millions who have been abused. The other thing is they used to separate families. Do you know that in Islam, according to Islamic law, if somebody falls a captive and it's a man and wife, then they cannot be separated. A family cannot be separated. There's a hadith, لعن الله من فرق بين أم وبنتها وابنها. Prophet ﷺ cursed anyone who separates between a mother and her children. And this kind of marital relationship that can be established with female captives, I mentioned it has multiple restrictions and multiple conditions that have to be fulfilled. Can somebody mention some of them that we've talked about in the previous nights? They have to be, they cannot be pagans, they have to either be Muslims or people of the book, okay?
Yes.
Correct? She cannot be pregnant. She cannot have a husband. If she has a husband, you can't have that. How can she have a husband and you also have kind of marital relationship with her? So all the conditions that normally apply when you go and seek a wife apply here. She has to be a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew. She cannot be married. She cannot be pregnant. And these are all the same conditions. And she cannot have this kind of relationship with somebody else, like they used to do in other nations, that she would have this kind of relationship with you, and when a friend comes, she would have sex with him, or you can send her out for prostitution. Although, and it's mentioned clearly in the Quran, وَلَا تُكْرِهُ فَتَيَاتِكُمْ عَلَى الْبِغَاءِ. Do not send them into prostitution, okay? Because some of the Arabs had still the old, they were still had the mind of the pre-Islamic era and wanted to do things like this. And all this was prohibited in Islam, and that also gives so much dignity. Correct? Finally, I will just mention just some quotes, and I won't read too long, because I said it is unfair always to bring up Islam and slavery while you give a blind eye to the text pertaining to slavery in other books, in their own books. And those are Christians who are talking about Islam. Why don't you look in your own book and see? Why do you talk about Islam? Okay? Read your own book, learn something. Okay? So I'll tell you, I won't read the whole verses. Basically, racial slavery. This was slavery based on race. Humanity never heard about this until the Westerners took the African slaves and slaves of other races. Also, in the Old Testament, it shows there's a difference that you cannot enslave a Hebrew more than 6 years, but if somebody is enslaved from other nations, they are enslaved for life and they are inherited as property. They are inherited as property, okay? So this is racial slavery. That was never in Islam something like this, but they still talk about Islam and slavery, while they have this racial slavery. Debt slavery, somebody giving himself or his daughter or some other family members as slaves just to fulfill his debt, okay? That is prohibited in Islam totally, and it is allowed in the Old Testament. I'm just giving you the summary, but I have all the text here and I've highlighted them if somebody can go back to them. They're mostly in Leviticus, Exodus, Deuteronomy. You can go back to these things. Also, beating a slave, totally prohibited in Islam. If you even slap a slave, he becomes free automatically. But here it says that if you beat the slave so hard that he dies, if he dies immediately, then you get punished. But it doesn't say what kind of punishment. If he dies after a day or two, you don't get punished at all. Imagine that. So beating a slave, totally prohibited in Islam. Here it is totally allowed and legislated, and there's rules pertaining to it in the Old Testament. Also separating families, same thing. They say if somebody comes into slavery and then you give him a wife, or he gets married, or he has children somehow, then if it's time for him to go free, then his wife and children do not go free, as if they are holding them hostage. The only way he stays with his wife and children if he comes back and becomes a slave forever, along with them, and then he is inherited as a property as well. Now, also giving daughters as slaves, I said this is called debt slavery. That is also legislated in the Old Testament, totally forbidden in Islam. Okay, and differentiation between Hebrew and non-Hebrew, I mentioned that to you. And being permanent slaves is something else I mentioned to you. Um, okay, this is basically the summary of, and not only that, but acquiring slaves. It says there, and also in the Old Testament, that when they attack a village, then, and people choose to fight back, then all the men would be killed, all the non-virgin women would be killed, all the virgin women would be taken as slaves along with their, and all the children will also be taken as slaves. Children and virgin women will be taken as slaves. But they said even the cattle and the animals would be killed as well. There's no, what did the cattle do? Yeah. They said even donkeys would be killed. Seriously, and this is all in that book.
Domestic donkeys or wild?
Okay. Finally, in the Old Testament, this is the Old Testament. The New Testament does not say, and then there's not a single text in the Old or New Testament calling for the release of slaves. This is something else. How many texts in Islam call for release of slaves? Uncountable. And how many examples? Uncountable, as I mentioned to you, some of them, okay? In the New Testament, basically the same thing, because New Testament doesn't have a law, as you know. It's basically you go by the old law of the Old Testament. But what does the Reformed Christianity say? The Pauline Christianity by Paul. He says here, slaves, obey your earthly masters with deep respect and fear. So basically he condones and reinforces slavery. He tells a slave to obey their earthly masters with deep respect and fear. Serve them sincerely as you would serve Christ. Christ for them is God. How can he tell people to serve a human being just like they would serve their own God? Totally unacceptable in Islam. Prophet ﷺ even said, do not even say the word slave, girl or slave boy. You should say my young man or my young woman. And he should not call you my Rabb. Okay, he should not call you my master or my Lord. Rabb means master or Lord. And then he says, because Allah is the Rabb of everybody, because Allah is the Lord of everyone. Where can you find a text like this in any other book but Islam? Subhanallah. And look at this. He says also in another text, I just don't have it right here, but with all, you stand in front of them, trembling in fear. This is what he says. And then they say, oh, Prophet Muhammad had concubines. He didn't have concubines, okay? Whoever fell into his captivity, either he freed and let go, or freed and got married to. Okay, we have Safiya, we have Juwayriyah, we have also Fatima, Maria al-Qibtiyya, okay? Concubines in the Old Testament, multiple texts here, as you can see, multiple texts talking about concubines. They say, oh, Prophet Muhammad had concubines. He didn't have. And they give a blind eye to the Old Testament, which shows that Prophet David had concubines. Prophet Solomon had how many?
1,000.
He had 300 concubines and 700 wives. And they don't even talk about these things. 700 wives and 300 concubines. Jacob also had a couple, and his son basically slept with one of them, and that was a way, that's what they say, astaghfirullah, may Allah forgive us, but this is what they say. His son slept with one of them, and this was one of the way to take, basically rule from your father, is to start sleeping with his concubines. I just wanted to mention this to you because you had to know these texts, because if somebody starts talking about Islam and slavery, then you know how to answer these things. And there's more. I only went through 4 pages. I had 28 pages here. I'll let you go. Go ahead.
So it is then fair to say that if someone comes to you and start blaming Islam for slavery, you can just tell them that there is a difference between Islam and Muslims. So if you look at the text of Islam, this is what Islam says about it. So
Exactly.
even for a person who's not a Christian or who's just an atheist,
Yes.
you can tell them that. And at the same time, it is possible to say that you cannot take an action for Muslims.
Exactly.
They are not following Islam.
And that's what I had. The other articles I have here talking about ISIS and their practices,
Yeah.
and responding to them.
And
I
that
have
has
all this
nothing to
here
do with Islam.
because Muslim scholars have denounced their actions. 100 Muslim scholars wrote a fatwa edict, basically saying that you guys are doing something totally un-Islamic,
Yeah.
and that you're trying to bring something that Islam worked hard on abolishing. You're trying to bring it back, and so many other things they talked about here. And this is a consensus that there's been a consensus of Muslim scholars that this should not happen. This consensus has been there for a century, and you guys are going totally against Islam. This is all here, and yes, absolutely. And then even the excesses and the abuses committed by Muslims in the history were never mounted to the abuses committed by other nations, such as the transatlantic slave trade. Go ahead.
And then if they come at you with the statement that why Islam did not prohibit right away slavery at the time of Prophet Muhammad, then we can tell them that there is a wisdom, because you can see what happened in the States with the Civil War, where millions of people, at least close to a million
Yes.
people died fighting.
And they didn't change anything, because
It didn't,
the-
yes.
it's a matter of there's a difference between declaring slavery prohibited and physically and actually changing
Yeah.
the status.
So there
Islam
was-
changed the status right away.